Operation Truth, the show they don't want you to see. Now, here's your host, Lou.
I've got today with us Tom Fuentes, former assistant director of the FBI. I don't even know how to quantify his career as other than brilliant. You know, Tom is exactly what this country needs. He's a blindly dedicated man that loves his country just like I do, and he understands its mechanism. We have both lived, the same number of decades in this country, and we both received a real extensive education as to what's driving this country. Tom understands it on a really intricate level. He ran the international operation for the FBI in 80 countries and its agents. He's been involved in more special ops groups with the FBI than I have hair in my head. And guys, I hate to break it to you, I got a lot of hair. We're going to bring him on shortly, and I think you're going to be entertained. Today, we're going to get into this thing about the Kennedy assassination and ultimately the history which is attached to what we're doing today. It's going to deal with the credibility of government and the loss of innocence. Stay with us, guys. I'm going to bring you Tom in a moment.
Hard Asset Management is a trusted leader in precious metals.
Tom, one of the reasons we decided to speak today revolves around the credibility of our country at this point. I think that many Americans, far too many, do not trust the government, do not trust the media. Unfortunately, we've destroyed the credibility of the FBI, local policing, our judicial system. And what's so interesting about this, and you and I were around during the Kennedy years and the Kennedy assassination. We were both little boys, but old enough to understand what the president was about and the climate that existed in the country. And I've always said, and I'd like you to correct me because I know you are historically based in your understanding of those years in particular and how they've translated to where we are today. I think it was the loss of the innocence of this country. I think it was the first time, Tom, we ever had to really face or come to terms with the fact that there are undercurrents, so to speak. In this instance, maybe it was the CIA, the power of organized crime in collaboration with the CIA. So I'd like you to just give us a little bit of insight as to what took place with John Kennedy, because my opinion, I'd like you to correct me if I'm wrong, it translates to what we're living today. It was the beginning of an era where we started to understand that there's trouble in paradise. Go ahead, Tom.
Well, basically, President Kennedy made some pretty powerful enemies. And, where do you want to start? If you want to start with the Mafia, that's one. In order to get elected...
Start with that. Tom, let's start with them and let's transition into the CIA, because we both, through our discussions, realized what he did or what was done during his election cycle and subsequently his term as president. So let's start with the organized crime people and then transition into CIA. And let us not forget the fact that the CIA, correct me if I'm wrong, were attempting to contract organized crime to kill Castro, which I think is an interesting relationship. But go ahead, continue, Tom.
Okay, you have President Kennedy's father meet with Giancana, the head of the Chicago Mafia family, and basically try to cut a deal with him, that if Giancana would help steal votes to help Kennedy get elected, not only in Chicago, but also with unions in West Virginia and some other states, but to put Kennedy over the top to be president, then Kennedy was, the father Kennedy, Joseph P. Kennedy, was telling the Mafia, he'll take care of you. He'll call off, the heavy investigations against the mob. You'll be able to do business again, do what you want to do. And it ended up being, a deal that wasn't honored. So President Kennedy gets elected, appoints his brother, Robert F. Kennedy, to be Attorney General, and Bobby Kennedy goes after the Mafia tooth and nail. And so that completely goes against what was promised to them.
Tom, can I ask you a quick question, sir? I've heard it stated that J. Edgar Hoover had a difficult time acknowledging that the Mafia even existed. Is that true? And if it is, why would that be?
It was true. And I'm not sure exactly whether, the Mafia blackmailed him on a couple of issues. Don't know. But yes, he was slow to recognize until the Mafia leaders of the country had a meeting in Appalachian, New York in 1957, where the local police interrupted that meeting. And then there was no denying who these guys were, what the purpose of the meeting was, everything about that. Then all of a sudden now the FBI had to acknowledge it was time to go after the Mafia. So yes, that was true at that time.
So you set the stage now for why Kennedy's presidency had, I would say, alienated the organized crime people who are alleged to have been instrumental in getting him elected. So tie in the CIA now.
Okay, that was only one of the sins against the mafia that Kennedy did.
Well, let's hear the rest. Let's do the rest of the laundry, Tom.
All right. The second half of that is that Kennedy gets introduced to a chorus girl named Judith Exner, and he begins an affair with her. Well, Judith Exner is also girlfriend of Sam Giancana, the boss of Chicago. Now, one of the absolute taboos in the mafia is you do not sleep with the boss's wife. You do not sleep with the boss's girlfriend. So in this case, Judith Exner is the girlfriend. She's seeing Kennedy, and she acknowledges this later. This comes out publicly later on. So she's sleeping with the president in the White House in the afternoon, and then commuting back to Chicago to have dinner and be with Giancana overnight.
So
that's a major.
Let me see if I understand this. And basically, Sam Giancana was never taught to share. Is that what you think that was driving?
That's exactly. That is one of the leading sins against the mafia boss. It's well understood within the mafia. You don't mess around with the boss's wife or girlfriend.
So, Tom, who made the introduction, do you think, with Judith Campbell to President Kennedy?
I think it was Frank Sinatra that had introduced all these people to each other.
That was the rumor, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. What else? What other mistakes did we make with organized crime during the Kennedy administration?
Well, when Kennedy goes after the bosses in a huge way, when they were supposed to get away with murder, literally, suddenly they're under attack by the Attorney General, the president's brother. So that attack included Carlos Marcello, the boss of the New Orleans mafia family. He was in the country illegally. He was an illegal alien born in Africa, actually. His parents were moving around, and he had entered the country illegally. Bobby Kennedy has him picked up off the streets of New Orleans in a business suit, dress shoes, fly him to Guatemala, and turn him loose in the jungle, figuring he'll never get out. He'll never survive that. Well, somehow he makes it back to New Orleans. Now he's bitter, even more bitter against the Kennedys themselves. So this is the mafia having their attitude against the Kennedys, the president and Bobby Kennedy together. Now the mafia at the time enters into basically a relationship with the CIA, where they're hired by the CIA to kill Castro in Cuba. And numerous attempts are made to assassinate Castro, which fail. And in some cases, they failed because the boss in Florida, Santo Trafficante, made a deal behind the scenes with Castro. I'll help keep you alive. I'll tell you when all these plots are coming to kill you. And in return, let me reopen a casino again in Havana. Now, what had happened was Castro comes to power, taking, basically a coup from Batista, was the head of Cuba. Batista let the mafia run wild in Havana. All of the families had casinos. So it was basically like Las Vegas in the late 50s going into 1960. Castro takes over and he ends that. He nationalizes all the casinos. He ends casino gambling. They're out. Santo Trafficante, one of the bosses from Florida, is trying to make a deal with Castro. I'll help keep you alive. My other colleagues in the mafia are trying to kill you, but I'll let you know when those plots are coming. And in exchange, Castro promises, I'll take care of you. I'll let you reopen casinos back in Havana. Later, Trafficante does help keep him alive. Castro lied to him, basically, and doesn't keep the deal. So that's what's going on with the mafia and the CIA in terms of trying to deal with Castro.
Isn't there some more backstory with the CIA and Dulles and Allen Dulles and his
brother?
I
was getting to all that.
I know. I'm just helping you along here, big guy. That's the bigger story. I know that.
I was trying to segue from mafia to the actual CIA.
I don't think it helped the fact that President Kennedy was quoted as saying he was going to shatter the CIA into 1,000 pieces. I don't suspect he garnered much followers doing that, but continue, Tom.
Okay. the CIA back, and you have every president from the founding of the CIA in 1947, including Truman, later Eisenhower, and then Kennedy, realized that, especially starting with Truman, realized that the CIA was out of control. They were supposed to be just gathering information around the world, read the newspapers, the radios, develop sources, and do nothing operationally, especially paramilitary operations, and feed that information back to Washington, to the State Department, to the White House, to Congress. What happens is that they start assassinating leaders in other countries. They start the big time war on communism, and basically overthrow a number of governments, which they weren't supposed to do. Truman lamented that he let them go too far. They're out of control. Eisenhower, basically the same thing, but they kind of take advantage of it, having them do some of the things that were bad that they wanted them to do. So in the case of Eisenhower, the CIA comes up with a plan that they're going to train all of these exiles or refugees from Cuba that are in South Florida, and set up a camp in the Everglades and train them to be like soldiers, and then help them go back into Cuba to try to take Castro out, have the revolution extend back. Now, during that time, this is going on during the Eisenhower administration, right at the end of Eisenhower's term, going into Kennedy's term. Now, when Kennedy finds out about this, the CIA is basically saying, okay, we won't need any U.S. military assets to carry this out. We have our own planes, painted white, which became a tradition with them, Air America. We have our own assets, so that to back up the beach invasion, we'll be able to back them up with our other assets, and none of this will reflect on the U.S. military. Well, then what happens is the invasion happens at the Bay of Pigs, and when the soldiers land, the Cubans are waiting for them. They start being annihilated or captured at the beach, and Dulles asks Kennedy, "We need U.S. military. You've got to back up these people on the beach. They're being slaughtered." And Kennedy basically says, "No, we're not going to have the U.S. be implicated in an invasion of our next door neighbor, Cuba." And that starts a major feud, if you will, or battle between the CIA and Kennedy.
We're going to take a quick break, Tom, and I want to continue this conversation with you because we ultimately know what this translated to on November 22nd of 1963, a very tragic day in the history of this country. And in my opinion, I think Tom might agree with me, it was a loss of our innocence. And I think it was really our wake-up call that there's something else driving in this country other than what we were led to believe. We're going to come right back, guys. Stay with us, please.
The world is in crisis, with political unrest and financially unstable countries trying to print their way to prosperity by taking on trillions of dollars of new debt. It's incredibly concerning. That's why you need to own silver as a hedge. So call today to receive the free hard asset information kit on how easy it is to own silver. Green energy demands will possibly turbocharge silver prices to 50, 100, even 300 an ounce, according to many experts around the world. Silver is a proven hedge against inflation. Since 1971, silver has returned over 11% when averaged yearly. Silver is a proven wealth preservation for hundreds of years. Hard Asset Management is a trusted leader in precious metals and rare coins for nearly 40 years. We have the guaranteed lowest prices, fast and easy ordering, expedited shipping, with award-winning customer service available 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. CST, Monday through Friday. So protect yourself from the chaos. Invest in stability with Hard Asset Management. Call now and get your free Hard Asset Management information kit on how easy it is for you to own silver. 844-426-4653. 844-426-4653.
We're back, ladies and gentlemen. We appreciate you hanging in there with us. And as you're probably listening, Tom Fuentes, a former assistant director of the FBI, has been giving some explanation as to what we believe drove the assassination of John Kennedy. Apparently, there were problems with his relationship with the Central Intelligence Agency and organized crime. Tom has explained to you why. And I want to ask you, Tom, a direct question, which, you have to realize, ladies and gentlemen, some things we talk about are conjecture, speculation, opinion. we want to leave it open-ended like that because as to date, we really have no concrete proof as to what drove the assassination of John Kennedy. But I do want to ask Tom, what do you think, Tom? What drove that?
Well, I think, to continue with the CIA, the feud, the battle with the CIA and President Kennedy gets worse instead of better. And the CIA is blaming Kennedy for the failure of the Bay of Pigs, which he acknowledges publicly. He makes a public address basically saying, this is my fault. I take responsibility for it. He didn't blow it off or lie about it. He said, it's a mistake. We shouldn't have done it. It's my mistake. So, but in the meantime, more and more things are coming up between Allen Dulles, the head of the CIA, and Kennedy. This includes trying to assassinate a couple of leaders in Africa, the assassination of leaders in Vietnam, things like that, where Kennedy is saying, stop that. I don't want you assassinating people.
Wasn't DM who we're referring to in Vietnam?
Yes.
We assassinated DM and placed into power the individual, which was
right. And this is after Kennedy had ordered the CIA, do not assassinate him. And they do it anyway. So finally, Kennedy fires the head of the CIA, Allen Dulles, and his top two assistants, and just fires them outright. Then he issues the public statement, as you mentioned, that he's going to blow them into 1,000 bits and eliminate the CIA. So that all gets set. So now there's another enemy. The next thing, Kennedy basically did not want to expand operations in Vietnam. So at the time in 1963, when he's president, he issues an order saying, I want the 15,000 military advisors in Vietnam pulled out of Vietnam by the end of 1964. We're not expanding. We're not going to war. We're not. So now he's made a bitter enemy of the military industrial complex because they see dollar signs like they see with every one of our wars. Basically here, they're going to make trillions of dollars if the war in Vietnam expands. And here's Kennedy saying it's not good. He issues a presidential directive to start pulling the advisors out. And that's I think in October of 63, right before he's killed, a month before he's killed. Now, interesting on that note is he gets killed on November 22nd, 1963. President Johnson, while Kennedy's funeral is ongoing, he issues the counter directive canceling Kennedy's directive to withdraw and saying, we're not withdrawing. We're going to go ahead and expand operations in Vietnam. That happens immediately upon the death of President Kennedy. So you've got all of these very powerful entities, from the Mafia to the CIA and intelligence community to the military, basically having just a bitter relationship and attitude towards Kennedy.
Would you like to render an opinion as to who killed John Kennedy?
Well, I think that more and more has come out now that it probably was the CIA, a CIA operation to do it. Now, when you talked about the loss of it, and basically it's a coup, taking out the president of the United States. When you talk about what happens afterward, or all the net result of this, more and more has come out since then. Now, where our basically loss of respect or trust in the government really starts big time with the Warren Commission. And what happens here, now all these documents and recordings come out of Lyndon Johnson calling senators, calling Earl Warren, Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, and saying, I'm putting this commission together. You've got to be on this commission. And basically, you've got to find Oswald as the lone assassin. No conspiracies and you have to do this to save your fellow Americans, because anything else comes out, it could lead to World War III. We could be in war with the Russians or others. We've got to have this solidarity of opinion that Lee Harvey Oswald is the lone assassin. Now, since then, more and more and more, with the gradual release of documents, all these years since 1963, more has come out about exactly how that was occurred.
Tom, I have to say one thing. We have both, in our own way, and I want to give you credit. You're far more of an historian than I am. what I come away with here was there was, in a sense, a power struggle as to who was really running the country. And I suspect that that element in the intelligence community believed, since they were probably going to be there as career men, 25, 30, 40 years, even as we've experienced in law enforcement, presidents kind of came and went 4 years, maybe 8 years. I think there was a power struggle there as to who was really running the joint. And in the end game, they exercised, I would say, the consummate means of addressment. They eliminated the opponent. You know, it was
another
so
interesting point on that, Lou, is that President Eisenhower, everybody knows that right before President Kennedy gets sworn in, he makes a speech where he warns, beware of the industrial military complex. And as a former, general during World War II, and of course, president during Korea, he knows what he's talking about with how powerful the military and the money going into the military is coming. But Eisenhower, there's another small part of that speech which doesn't get much attention at all. Eisenhower also issues a warning about the administrative state, and that's now nicknamed the deep state. And so he's warning at that time that the intelligence part of the government, not just the military, but the intelligence agencies, and at that time he's already aware that he doesn't trust the CIA himself, that they're out of control, even before President Kennedy gets in and has his direct experiences with them. So here's President Eisenhower issuing a warning to the country: beware that these entities basically will be in charge. That's what it really amounts to, is saying, the president, the Congress, your elected officials, forget all of those guys. It's going to be the deep state, or the administrative state, as Eisenhower referred to them, and the military and all the money that goes into that.
Guys, I want to take a quick break, and we come back to former Assistant FBI Director Tom Fuentes. I think we're giving you some food for thought, as I like to put it. Very interesting. And ultimately, we're going to tie this all in as we continue this conversation with this loss of belief and trust in our government and the media, and many of the mechanisms that should represent the foundation of this country. I'm going to be right back, guys.
Hard Asset Management is a trusted leader in precious metals and rare coins for nearly 40 years. We have the guaranteed lowest prices, fast and easy ordering, expedited shipping, with award-winning customer service available 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. CST, Monday through Friday. So protect yourself from the chaos. Invest in stability with Hard Asset Management. Call now and get your free Hard Asset Management information kit on how easy it is for you to own silver. 844-426-4653. 844-426-4653.
We're back, ladies and gentlemen. And I want to ask Tom to do us a service and get a little more involved in this discussion about this Warren Commission, because as we've come to learn through the decades, almost 6 of them now, a lot of controversy around it. So, Tom, can you further expand on this Warren Commission and deficiencies, or how this whole thing came about and how it was constructed to mislead the American public?
Okay, well, President Johnson basically strong arms the members, including Warren himself, to be on this commission to find Oswald the lone assassin. No ifs, ands, or maybes. They're supposed to.
And this is Johnson, correct, sir?
This is President Johnson.
Thank you.
Issuing Earl Warren and the other members their marching orders. Lee Harvey Oswald did it. He's the lone assassin. Make sure you find that result. Now, what happens, here's an interesting point in this. I mentioned President Kennedy had fired Allen Dulles, not being able to trust him. Johnson puts Allen Dulles in charge of the Warren Commission investigation. He's the one that makes the determination who gets interviewed, who doesn't, what's going to go into the report, what isn't going to go into the report. And basically, Allen Dulles is in a position to make sure no bad information comes out or gets recorded and put in the report that concerns the CIA itself or the intelligence community. His job then is to, again, further the proof that Oswald did it and hide anything that would implicate the intelligence community in this. So as this goes on, as each year goes by after the report is issued, fewer and fewer Americans trust the report. And that's basically what happens, because more and more investigations by other individuals, journalists, when we had real journalists in this country, are looking into the story, and they're seeing too many discrepancies, too many false pieces of information put into it. The botched autopsy of President Kennedy, all of those facts that have gone into it, basically erode the trust of the American people that they're being told the truth about the most important event in their lifetime, in our lifetime, the assassination of the president.
Well, let me ask you this. There's no secret that they keep pushing the date further and further away regarding the release of some classified information and documents regarding this assassination. What's the concern 60 years later? This November 22nd will be the 60th anniversary of the assassination of John Kennedy. What's the reluctance now? We've gone through a lot of generational change.
Originally the excuse initially, decades ago was, sources and methods, and people might get killed, and we can't divulge this information. We've got to sit on it, protect it, until everybody that had any association with the assassination or possible association has died. Well, that's all happened now. Everybody's gone. That was in official position. But there's one more entity to protect that isn't dead. It's the CIA. That's what's holding it back. So you have, for instance, President Trump promises in his campaign he's going to release the rest of these documents. And by law, they've already passed a law that said he has to. During his presidency, the remainder are supposed to be released. Then what happens is he gets a visit from the head of the CIA at that time, Pompeo, before he becomes Secretary of State. And suddenly, after this visit with Pompeo visiting Trump, never mind. President Trump reneges and does not release the documents. So now it comes out, well, Joe Biden is supposed to release them. He promises to release them. They're still not being released. So what you really have is, and a number of the investigators that have been involved in this for a long time are saying there are documents still to be revealed which show other entanglements in this thing. A lot of it is speculation that those documents that are still in custody reflect the fact that Oswald was an operative of the U.S. government when he went to Russia. It was a phony defection, and he was one of a couple dozen Marines that joined this program where they're going to go to Russia and claim that they're no longer, U.S. citizens, they hate the U.S., and they're going to defect to the Soviet Union. And so that comes out that Oswald did that, and that, that's what he did. And when he didn't get very far gathering intelligence over there, and he meets Marina, who he marries, Marina is an operative of the KGB. So she's put on the case of watching Oswald. Oswald is put on the case of learning as much as he can in the town he lives in, which is Minsk, which is now capital of Belarus. So eventually Oswald comes back and gets his citizenship back and says, okay, I'm a U.S. citizen again. So much of Oswald's relationship, and by the way, he wasn't being operated directly by the CIA. He was being operated by the Naval Intelligence Service. The Naval Intelligence Service, by the way, the same service that operated mobster Lucky Luciano during World War II to help maintain peace on the docks and avoid sabotage. So the Mafia was being used during World War II to keep guard on our ships loading and unloading in the harbors, especially New York Harbor.
Tom, what you come away with here is the beginning of a discussion that lends itself into some shady dealings that translate even to today. This whole impetus to Vietnam, a little shaky. Nixon's administration, very shaky. I would say this misgiving about bringing China into the mainstream of the conversation, which occurred with Nixon and Kissinger. And it's just, following us right through the decades and through these presidential administrations to where we are today. I would love to keep this conversation going, and I think we need to do that next week, Tom, if you're available. I want to keep talking about this and how we got where we are today, and most importantly, the road back, if there is a road back. I do want to ask you about individuals like Pompeo. I have mixed emotions. Mike Pompeo, excuse me. You need a scorecard at this point to keep track of the players. And we're at a crisis right now, and what supports that statement is looking at the conditions of the country. It's foreign policies, it's border policies, it's policies governing our major cities, our energy sector policies, our economic policies.
Right.
You know, we're going to hell in a handbasket here. And like I say to people, Tom, I'm not telling anybody who to vote for. You know what I am saying to you? Try to love your children more than you love your politics and your agenda, and stop listening to the media, because the media is at the root of the problem today.
Well, one
You know,
of the
they're
things,
creating
Lou,
in-
is there's an old
Go
expression.
ahead, Tom.
There's an old expression in the government. It's not where you stand on an issue; it's where you sit. So when you have people that are saying we're going to release documents, or we're going to do this, or we're going to do that, and suddenly they get put into a particular chair, like head of the CIA, since they're sitting there, their position changes from what it might have been if they weren't sitting there. And that's what you have when people take over these agencies and suddenly decide, no, our agency is not going to do that.
You know, Tom, and when we have time, I want to ask you about John Ratcliffe. I've watched quite a number of interviews with this individual, and I'm coming away with he's pretty knowledgeable and has his hand on the pulse of many of the issues that are troubling the country today. You know, there's so much for us to talk about, Tom. This show is going to go on for a long period of time. All you and I have to do is continue to live to promote it. You know, we've got to continue to visit these issues. I want to continue to talk about the assassination of John Kennedy and the era it ushered us into with Vietnam, which was really the first time people ever stood up to the government and questioned what the hell we were doing here. We just blindly followed the government. You know, I say something, and I don't want to continue to talk about this today because we're running out of time, but we're quick to label our children Generation X, Generation Z. You and I came from a generation where we never questioned our government and its legitimacy. We never questioned the media. Then again, we didn't grow up with the 24-hour news cycle. We never questioned or thought that they would weaponize the judicial system or harm the honor or the integrity of the FBI, which was the stopgap. When all else failed, the FBI was there. We knew they would hold the flag. This is all they've known. You know, so we're watching these kids bounce like basketballs. Just try to plug into what their life has been, their frame of reference to this country, and now try to sell them something that we want them to buy into. It's an interesting conversation. We're quick to point the finger. We're not so quick as to figure out how to get the genie back in the bottle if it can. I think personally, we owe an explanation and an apology to these young children in this country, because we've taken them into a very, very dark phase of America. I don't recognize this country, Tom. I have to tell everyone, by the way, Tom is older than I am. I just want to go on record. He's a day older, but he's older, and I'm going to hang it over him. But you understand my point. We grew up in a different America, and it wasn't perfect, Tom. And this country's made a lot of mistakes. We're continuing to make mistakes. I have an interesting mentality, and I think everybody involved in this production understands this. Identify the mistake, learn from the mistake, and forge forward, because we can't linger on what that mistake is except for the benefit of learning from it. We're beating ourselves over the head with our past. We just can't seem to move beyond it. But I want to say one other thing here today before I let this go. They list the population of the United States as 335 million. 0.5% of that is 1,675,000 people. I would ask you, Tom, having a very extensive law enforcement background, local and Illinois, and then with the FBI, could you imagine what this country would be like if we had 1 million people up in arms every year engaged in some type of subversive activity or in dissent? The percentage of the country that is steering this country into destabilization is infinitesimal, ladies and gentlemen. We're always going to have malcontents. We've had them since the beginning of time. Like, we could talk about these topics all day long, no matter what. They're just things that have hamstrung people, men. We're human. We make mistakes. But the long and the short of it is, and I love to touch this topic every time I speak, you have to address this thing with the media. I never realized that you would have the indiscriminate ability to disseminate information that you know is false. Where's the accountability? We don't have accountability with the media. We don't have it with the elected officials. You have to have accountability, guys. And I want to remind everybody about the border. The border is a problem. We're now hearing from elected Democratic officials, elected officials like Eric Adams, that they're overwhelmed in the city of New York with 70,000 migrants. I can't imagine what he'd be thinking if he was at the border of Texas or Arizona, where they're coming in the millions, hundreds of thousands every month, I might note. Can't afford to house them, can't find housing for them. Now he's attempting to displace them to contiguous counties like Nassau and Suffolk and Rockland, just above New York City. Oh yeah, and throughout New York State. We have a problem here with this border issue. Are we so blinded by an agenda that we're prepared to destroy the future of our children? And my concern is maybe we are. Tom, we're going to let it go for today. I do want to come back and pick up this conversation. I want to take us through the years, Tom, because interestingly enough, you and I were little boys in the 50s. Then we started high school and college in the 60s. And then we went into our careers in law enforcement in the 70s, and then eventually into the private sector. And we've gotten some education as to what's making this country drive itself. And the thing about this that makes me craziest, these are fixable problems. All you've got to do is change your agenda and focus on your children, because we're destroying their future and we're going to destroy this country. Guys, I'm going to wrap it for today. Tom, these lessons are invaluable. I'm not saying this for any other reason. It's the truth. I love talking to you because of everything I learned from you. I've had some journey. I've learned a lot of just observing. I talk a lot. I listen more and I observe more. Every time I talk to you, I learn about something else. It's just astonishing.
Thanks, Lou.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I have to say, if there's one individual that could get the FBI back on course in about 30 days, you're looking at this gentleman right here. He possesses the honor, the integrity, and the trustworthiness that the FBI once had. And for those of you that want to question what we're saying and we're picking on the FBI, I merely ask you, take a look at the text message exchange between Peter Strzok and Lisa Page. Am I correct, Tom?
Absolutely.
And then the rest of the shenanigans which went on with Jim Comey about changing verbiage or language that resulted in Hillary Clinton not being indicted when clearly she mishandled classified information. We're going to bring on at some point Bob Boyce, former chief of detectives in the New York City Police Department, and talk to you about Umar Abedin's computer, which happens to have possessed classified information from Hillary Clinton. And her husband, Anthony Weiner, was taking photos of Mr. Winky, use your imagination, and sending him to who he thought was a 14-year-old girl, Tom. She was an undercover. We're going to bring him on at some point in time to speak to this as well. You know what this all comes down to, guys? I'm not a Republican and I'm not a Democrat. Vote for whomever you think is going to take you down Primrose Lane. All I'm saying to you is open your eyes, step away from your agenda, your politics, and look at the direction this country's going. If you're content with what's happening at the borders, continue to vote for that political mechanism that's enabling that to happen. If you think our major cities are being run properly, continue to vote for that political mechanism that's doing that. I don't know what to say to you about the energy sector. From one day to the next day, our gas prices, they went up to almost $5 a gallon after I was paying $1.77. This is a fact. This is not opinion, conjecture, speculation, guys. This is the truth. We want to transition into electric. I think all of us, no matter who we are generationally, would like to have a cleaner form of energy, something that enhances the future of our children. We're just not ready, folks. We can't supply you enough electricity to put your air conditioning units on in New York City or to charge your cars in California. Fact. This is not fiction. Oh, by the way, the lithium batteries are charged by steam turbines, which are fueled by fossil fuel and primarily nuclear energy. And one final note for the day, we hear no conversation about nuclear energy. To be honest with you, at some point, we're going to have to embrace this concept. And as I mentioned to you in prior occasion, maybe we can collaborate with governors and states that are contiguous to one another, that they can position these state-of-the-art reactors, like the ones we have on our aircraft carriers or nuclear submarines, to where they're not, I would say, in harm's range or harm's distance of a large populace, you know, less densely populated. I got California, geologically not sound. I wouldn't put a reactor there, folks. They do have one, Diablo Canyon, which I believe has been decommissioned. But guys, let's start to solve these problems. Let's stop beating each other over the head, hit problem by problem. There's a value in listening to Tom Fuentes today because he's setting the stage for why we're living what we're living today, guys. Just listen to the content of this conversation. We're going to continue this conversation next week, Tom. We're going to transition into the 60s, the 70s, and when we hit the 80s, we hit Wall Street off and running. And as I always say, we value money more than we value our safety, and we value our children. We haven't even talked about misappropriation of funding to the Ukraine. Not that I don't think we should back the Ukraine, but why are we disproportionately supporting it? We're one of 30 nations, 27 of the NATO nations, by the way, are in Europe. We have this disproportionate contribution to this. We haven't talked about Hunter Biden, classified information, the mishandling of this whole case, by the way, Tom. So, guys, stick with us. We're coming back next week. So is Tom.
Absolutely.
Don't leave town. And I have to say once again, you shame me again with your suit and tie, you son of a gun. Guys, thank you for joining us today. and we hope to see you next week. Thank you so much for joining us.